Hello, my name is Dr. Tom Bennett. I'm with the Battleship New Jersey and the Kane University Oral History Project. Today I'm interviewing Mr. Edward Holweger, who served aboard the USS Monterey during World War II and was in the Navy from August 1943 to March 1946. His duty aboard the ship was flight deck plane handler, and his rating was as an aviation mechanic mate third class. I'll be assisted today in this work by Mr. Ron Catardi, one of the docents aboard the Battleship New Jersey, and Ron was very kind to meet Ed and ultimately bring him to the ship today, August 24, the year 2010. Ed, let's start off the conversation. How did you get involved with the U.S. Navy and specifically the USS Monterey?
Uh, I had a brother that was in the Navy, an older brother, and I always looked up to him. And I wanted to join the Navy because I couldn't. If I got in the Army and I had to point a gun to somebody and kill them, I didn't have the heart to do that. I was all my life. Early life I was in Sunday school every Sunday, and then I bring that up because of an incident happened on the flight deck during the war. So that's why I wanted the Navy, and I didn't realize how many people I would be killing. It upset me very much.
Talk to me before we actually get into the Navy. What was the environment, the attitude of the people in the United States during, say, 1942-43? I assume you were still in high school at that time?
I graduated in '38, and then I went to 2 years at a trade school, took up machine design.
So what was the attitude of the people at this time before you enlisted?
Well, they were more or less didn't want anything to do with war, but then the Germans started bombing England, and things started to change, and people, our country decided to manufacture airplanes and instruments for the British and that was the start of it. And so when the Japanese struck, well, we were already into war work. I guess that's about how people felt at that time.
And then what made you said your brother served as a model for you to go in the Navy. You didn't want to be in the Army. But could you have had a draft deferment? Did you volunteer, I assume, for the Navy?
I was deferred because of my job. And I worked for 2 years before I entered the Navy. And my reason, I quit my deferment. The reason I did because I was the only kid in the neighborhood that wasn't in the service. My older brother was in the Navy. My younger brother was in the Army. And so I just quit, and they were going to, the draft board grabbed me, but I told them that I wanted Navy. And because of my background with aviation, working for Bendix Aviation, they decided to put me in the Navy.
Once you got in the Navy, do you recall anything about boot camp? What was it like?
I was I did my best to do everything right, and when I finished boot camp, I was awarded this the sailor with the best, took care of his property, bed and all that. I was awarded #1. That's,
Must have done a good job, sounds like.
Yeah.
Even though the best, I was not the best in my boot camp, that's for sure. But, so after boot camp, did they send you to any technical school?
yeah, I went to aviation machinist school, and I was there for, I guess it was about 5 or 6 months, and and the thing is, when I graduated, they said I would get my aviation machinist 3rd class petty officer. I get that rate when I get assigned to my ship. I got I was assigned to the Monterey, and there was about 100 or so on the flight deck, on the hangar deck, and they said, this half goes on hangar deck and this half goes on the flight deck. I went up on the flight deck and never did any work on that aviation maintenance.
So with this background you had at Bendix Corporation, building aviation control devices, and then have going to school for 5 or 6 months, they simply put you on a flight deck and you don't use all your skills and abilities then.
Right.
That sounds like the military to me. I don't know why. It sounds familiar, doesn't it?
So I worked, they said I'd get my rate when I got assigned to Monterey. And I got there and I asked them about my rate, and they said we didn't have any rates to give out. So I worked all during the war and my term in the Navy as a seaman 1st class. And then after I was discharged, they handed me my certificate of aviation machinist mate 3rd class.
After you were discharged.
Yeah.
Well, that's thoughtful of the military, isn't it? But that's, we all experience that. Now, you're on the flight deck then. What type of airplanes did they have on the Monterey? The CVL-26, I should say, CVL-26.
Yeah, they had the Wildcats, F6, I think they were Wildcats or Hellcats. And then we had about 4 TBM bombers, torpedo bombers. And that was about it as far as aircraft.
And what would be your specific job as a plane handler?
Well, when the planes were getting ready to take off, I was assigned to hold on to the landing gear, and when the plane is about to move forward, I would take the chock out from between the wheels and then carry that up to the catapult. Anytime we had to move planes, that's what was my job.
With all that training and job experience, your job was to move the chocks around then?
Yeah, and then also when we had to secure the planes after they landed, move them back into position, and we had 3/4 inch millinery manila line, and we would tie the planes down, and that's about it, I guess.
Now, that work sounds to me quite dangerous, because when I see old films of men working on these desks, removing the chocks and so on like that, you're a couple feet away from the propeller. Did any men ever get hurt that you know of on the ship?
Yeah, we would be, the planes would be, you're in amongst 25 planes turning over. And our job would be like 5 guys on each side of the plane, and the pilot would release the wing and they would slide down and we'd be underneath and push it up, locking in position. and the man next to me, he lost his balance and he fell into the turning propeller, and he chopped them all up, and I still see the arms and legs and parts of his body flying by me. But and there was always somebody trying to get out of the road of crashing planes, and there was what they call the resting gear crew, and when the cables got frayed, they would take the 85 foot of cable and wrap it up and take it to the end of the flight deck and push it over the side, and these two guys did that, and they got tangled up with the cable, and they went over with the.
That's it. Never saw them again, probably.
No.
Sure. When planes are coming back, the Wildcats are coming back, and you were probably, if it's 43, 44, you're on the ship, they were
Yeah.
probably using Hellcats. I think it's Hellcats. First Wildcats, then Hellcats
Yeah,
came in.
Hellcat,
Yeah. What is it like to be on the deck? And I assume some airplanes came in damaged and so on like that from combat or whatever. What are some of these? If you could give us a visual picture of this, describe it. What would be some of the situations you saw?
Well, some of the planes were on fire when they come in for a landing, and they would bust open the open flames, and they'd, if the tailgate hook onto the cable on the flight deck, they would run into the barrier, and it was a real mess at times. Sometimes I had to jump down in the catwalk to get out of the road of a plane crashing, and that's when I hurt my knee. And I was all red and swollen, and I went to the sick bay, and they looked at it and they said, "Oh, you'll be all right." So I guess they figure I was trying to get excuse to get off the ship. So that night, the typhoon struck, and so I didn't. After that, I didn't have to go to work on the flight deck anymore, and my ship was so badly damaged, we headed back to the Bremerton Navy Yard in Seattle, Washington.
And that's going to be the Typhoon of December 1944, I believe.
Yeah.
Just before we get to that, how about the pilots? What happened to some of the pilots when they crashed? Were they saved? Did any planes go off the side of the ship that you saw? And just for the listener, by the way, the CVL-26 was an Independence class carrier built on the hull of a light cruiser.
Right.
So it wasn't a modern Essex class. It was a light carrier. Was it known as a Jeep carrier? Would that be the name given to it, or was it just called light carrier?
And just light carrier. It's different from the Jeeps.
Yeah.
Jeeps were smaller.
And your planes were designed to attack other ships or land targets, or both?
Both.
Both. Where Jeep carriers were mainly designed for land attack, as I understand, most of the time.
We did battle with the Jap fleet.
Could you talk about that a bit?
Well, Admiral Halsey was one of the main things. He was told a Typhoon Cobra was coming. He was told to get out of the way, and he didn't do it. He stayed to cover the landings on Lady Gulf. And that's when the Cobra struck and devastated the Third Fleet.
Why don't you talk to Ron? Do you want to handle this part? Because Ron Guattardi's done some more research on the Typhoon of '44. Do you want to handle some questions on this,
Sure,
Ron?
thank you. Thanks, Tom. Uh, can you just tell us about your experience during the Typhoon Cobra in December '44, in your own words, from the beginning?
Well, the night that the typhoon struck, I had the mid-watch up on the flight deck, and the officer in charge of the watch was Gerald Ford, and I didn't know him as Gerald Ford. I just knew that I found that out later, that he was on the same watch with me, and things got kind of bad, and it rained, and it wasn't just drops of rain, it was sheets of rain. I never saw rain like that. And so after about, we would check the lines, manila lines, and tighten them and shorten them and loosen them, because they kept changing because of the being so wet. So things got so bad that Gerald Ford called us off of the flight deck. He's afraid we were going to get, something happened. So after we sort of, during the night, I guess we spent a couple hours in the Singelman's cabin, and we had some coffee and stuff like that. And after the watch was over, I had a choice to go to breakfast or to get in my rack. So I decided to get in my rack. I no sooner got in my rack, and there was general quarters, man your battle stations, and at that point there was a loud explosion. It rocked the whole ship, and so I helped pull a hose out, and they dropped it down onto the hangar deck because to fight the fire. The ships had 500 gallons of aviation gasoline in belly tanks, plus another 500 in the wings of the regular gasoline tanks.
The explosion, Ed, was from the planes in the hangar deck breaking loose from their...
Yeah, the gasoline was running all over, and
Okay.
I understand a tool locker opened up, the ship rolled, and the tools fell down, and that's what sparked, as a spark, and it exploded the gasoline.
How severe was the rolling of the ship?
Very bad. The burning aircraft on the hangar deck were rolling back and forth and crashing into each other, and gasoline was running all over, and the guys trying to fight the flames. Some of them had to hang from they had a line hanging from the bottom of the hangar deck, flight deck, and they would squirt the hose, swing back and forth, squirt the hose. And then there was a man that they wanted to, underneath the hangar deck, flight deck, was a large tank that had water stored in it. It was called deluge. In case of fire, they would open this up, and the place would flood with water. But they couldn't get to that station because this man that controlled anyhow, that controlled the water, he he couldn't get to a station because the planes went over the side, took the catwalk. That was one way he had to get to it. Another way, he had to go up from the hangar deck up to beneath the flight deck, there was a station, and there was all fire there. So this man was a black man, and at that time, black men weren't allowed to travel around the ship. They had to stay in officers' quarters. So he said he'll go up there if they would squirt the hose on him, and he got in amongst all the flames, and they fired the hose on him, and he climbed up the ladder into his compartment where he controlled the deluge, and he eventually got the Navy Medal of Honor for that.
So he was able to flood the hangar deck?
And it was funny. They got so much water, like on the forward elevator that was on the hangar deck. So they opened the side doors, big overhead doors, to let the water out. And this one guy went out with the water. It was like 4 feet. So along comes a wave and wash him back on board.
Really? So he survived very luckily.
Yeah.
Right.
Amazing.
During this time, what was Gerald Ford doing? Because I read an article that he went below to help fight the fire.
Yeah. He when the explosion occurred, he just got in his rack, and he jumped up and went up the ladder and to the flight deck, and he managed to get to the ladder that leads up to the I forget what they call it, the controls compartment where the captain's quarters.
The bridge?
Bridge, yeah. And he was heading for the ladder, and the ship rolled, and he fell down and slid across the flight deck. And there were still catwalks there, and so he landed in the catwalk, and then he got up again and managed to get up the ladder into the bridge. And from there, Captain Ingersoll ordered him to go down, take a crew and get down and get the dead men and injured out of the below decks. And so then he saw that the flames were running through the
Hangar deck?
no, they were running through the ventilating system,
Ventilation.
and the whole ventilating system was on fire. The hangar deck was on fire, and the gasoline was running down below decks, and so he managed to some way shut the ventilating system off, and that sort of dampened there was no air for the fire to continue in the ventilating system.
Tell us about the damage below decks, below the hangar deck from the fires that went down through the ventilating system.
Well, the ship's galley blew up and went down the second deck, another deck, and it blew up the ship's laundry and continued burning all the way down, and it got to the point where it was flames were approaching the ammunition compartment, and Captain Ingersoll was one of the guys manning a hose to keep the water from spreading going into the ammunition compartment. Of course, there was 500 500-pound bombs in there. So he managed to keep it away. They couldn't put the flames out, but they squirted it away. And I don't know how long that went on, but see, I wasn't there. I was up on the flight deck all this time.
What else? But where was Jerry Ford, and what was his role in putting out the fires, as far as you know?
Well, he managed to turn the ventilating system off. I don't know. He was that was pretty involved. That was he had to go through a lot of he had to go through a lot of burning gasoline to do something like that, and that's why they said if they hadn't shut off the burning gasoline, there was a possibility the whole ship would have blown up.
There were reports that they had received orders to abandon ship. Is that true?
Yes. But then Admiral Halsey ordered to abandon ship for Ingersoll to abandon ship, and he said that he thinks he can handle the situation. And there was a cruiser, I forget the name of it, pulled alongside. Well, I was ordered to report to my abandoned ship station, the Air Department. And so I'm in my compartment, the last compartment at this end of the ship, and so there was no way I could get up there, because I went out, tried to get out the left port side, and the guy says, you can't go out there, there's no catwalk out there. I went over the other side, and same thing. So I went back into my apartment, and I thought, well, geez, maybe if I go out the catwalk that ran across underneath the flight deck, and that was, so I did that. I got out there and go across around the landing signals, and I thought then I could climb up to but there was no ladder. There was a ladder there, but I couldn't, the catwalk at landing signals dropped off. There was no, so I'm looking at it, and I see a ladder that goes up. It's welded to the side of the ship, and it goes up to the flight deck. And so I thought, well, maybe I can reach that. I reached over, and everything's wet. My hands started slipping. I quickly grabbed with my other hand and brought my feet over, and I climbed up onto the flight deck. It was about 5 feet, and I started walking across the flight deck, and guy goes like this, and so I got down on my hands and knees, and it was like a muddy football field because the fire from the under the hangar deck melted all the caulking that was underneath the wood part of the flight deck. It was like a muddy football field. I crawled all the way up through that mess, got up to my abandoned ship station, was right by the bridge, ladder up to the bridge. So things got really bad. The wind blew the ship over. Some say there was 70-foot waves, but I just the ship rolled over so far, and I grabbed a hold of the gutter, and I just hung there. I just if I would have let go, I would have slid right off. So I watched the ship rolled over. The wind would get underneath like where the flight deck extends out over the side of the ship. And it pushed the ship over, and I'm looking at the waves. The gun mounts are underwater, and the waves are lapping along the edge of the flight deck. And I thought, well, this one time it rolled over and it stayed there, and I thought, well, this is it. This is the end. And so I said a prayer, but I didn't ask God to save me because it was hopeless. And so I asked him to be with my mother, comfort her because she will never see me again. And then I watched. I thought we're sure we were going to roll over, but then every once in a while the wind would die down a little bit, and the ship would right a little bit. And
did you see any ships roll off the flight deck? Any planes? I'm sorry.
oh, all the planes but one went over the side. And there was 22 or something like that. One was left, and of course all the planes on the hangar deck were destroyed.
Anything more you can tell us about Jerry Ford's role in the saving of the ship? You said earlier you had a little story you wanted to tell about Jerry Ford.
Well, I have this. Where is it? It's an article about. What's this? This is an article about Gerald Ford, how he saved the ship.
Do you agree that his actions were heroic in?
Oh yeah, because he had to go through burning gasoline and to pull out men that were dead, and some of the men were injured, badly burned.
You mentioned you were ordered up to an abandoned ship station. Why were you sent? Why was that a station to use for abandoning ship? Was it high enough to jump onto another ship, or what?
Well, it was up. It was on the flight deck, and this cruiser pulled alongside, and we were ordered to abandon ship, and not to get to our stations. And then when they told us, they didn't tell us to abandon ship, but I would have had to jump 40 feet into the water and swim across to the cruiser and up the flight they had like a wooden ladders, net ladder, and we'd climb up that. And I thought, I don't think I'm going to jump into that.
Yeah, there was a typhoon going on, and
Oh, yeah.
jumping into the water was not a good choice.
So how long this typhoon went on for? 2 days, I understand?
Yeah, it started at night, and then during when morning came, it was, I just went blank.
That's okay. So it starts at night, and then the morning comes, did it start to calm down by the morning?
Oh yeah, we got into the eye of the storm, and
You actually got into the eye.
yeah, and things sort of slowed up a little bit, and they decided for some reason they're going to launch planes, and so they turned the propellers on, and I'm holding on to a landing gear, and they told us to pull the chocks out. The planes were going to move forward. And I said, man, who's crazy? Somebody crazy, because the planes were jumping up and down, really jumping up. And so then they called off the flight.
And when did they cancel the go to abandoned ship stations order? Do you remember?
The cruiser that was alongside, they took off. And I wonder, they took off in a hurry. And after the war, I talked to one of the kids in the neighborhood who was on that cruiser. And he says the captain came over to the loudspeaker, and as they were pulling away in a hurry, and he says, that's the last we're going to see of the Monterey. And so that's what this kid told me. And so I often wondered why they left in a hurry. And here it was because the gasoline was approaching the ammunition compartment. And if that struck with 500-pound bombs, it'd be nothing less from both ships.
So in effect, then, your ship was written off as lost at sea. That's what the command structure said.
Yeah, we were dead in the water. And
now, after the typhoon dies down, do you recall what your feelings were, that you're alive? And tell us about what did you see on the ship after the typhoon calms down? And then what were you thinking about? What were you feeling?
All the time, through all of this, I had no feeling. I just went through it. And I often wondered why I was never afraid. All this going on, I was never afraid. After the war, I used to rent space out, and this Japanese lady, she rented space, and she operated a flower department, flower shop. And we got talking one day, and I said, I guess my planes would drop napalm on the Japanese just all over the place. And she says that was awful. And she said, 4 times I went to my job, and when I came back, my place where I was staying was completely gone, burned up. And she told me, she says, going all through that, she says, I was never afraid. And she was a Christian. And I think God took care of us.
So the Typhoon ends. Tell me what the ship looks like.
Oh, the hangar deck was a mess, was wrecked, burned up planes. There was hardly anything left, but like the engines was still there, and nothing, no, there was just the one plane on the flight deck.
Was that the one they were trying to launch? The one plane on the flight deck?
Yeah, they were trying to launch that, and the pilot didn't want to. He didn't want to fly it, and
So after the Typhoon ends now, Ed, the ship goes back to Bremerton.
yeah,
Did it go under its own power? Was it towed?
no, we traveled like 10 knots per hour.
And do you recall what the men were feeling at this point when they went through this typhoon? They're going back to the United States. Do you recall anything?
No, we just were there.
And didn't the ship go to Olethe Harbor before it left for the States? A lot of the Third Fleet ships did. Right after the typhoon in late December?
Yeah.
Do you recall that?
I think it was Caroline Islands first, and then we went back to Pearl Harbor, and they decided that we were so damaged that they couldn't fix us at Pearl Harbor, so they sent us up to Bremerton.
After the typhoon, there was a board of inquiry, a Navy board of inquiry in Olethe Harbor, questioning whether Halsey's judgment was correct. Do you remember hearing anything about
Yeah,
the
the
board
only
of
thing
inquiry?
I heard was they were going to court-martial Halsey because he disobeyed Admiral King's order. He was chief of naval operations, and but then
The order to what? Avoid the typhoon?
he was ordered to avoid it, and he didn't do that. He decided he was covering the landings on Lady Gulf, and he figured we covered the troops landing there.
Captain Ingersoll testified before the captain of the Monterey.
Yeah.
He testified before that board of inquiry. Did you hear anything about his testimony?
Not really. I didn't get into that.
I imagine the crew of the Monterey was pretty supportive of Captain Ingersoll and his actions.
Oh yeah.
Going into the sea in that typhoon wouldn't have been much fun, I'm sure.
He was a good captain. I had a lot of respect for him.
Did you have many dealings with him?
No.
But you respected him as a skipper.
Oh yeah.
How about Jerry Ford? Did you have much contact with him? Not necessarily during the typhoon, but before or after?
Well, I was on the same watch with him that night the typhoon struck, and I found out after the war the officer in charge of the flight of the night watch was Gerald Ford. That would be the only. After the war, I had my certificate crossing the equator, and so I sent it to my congressman. He lived across the street from me, and he took it down to Washington, and he got Gerald Ford to sign it. So he says,
When he was president, was he president at the time?
His best wishes, Ed Holweger. Gerald Ford.
Do you still have that document?
Yeah.
Very good.
Ed, there's some conflict in some of the readings I've done about what Jerry Ford's duties were on the ship. I saw one place where he was gunnery officer, another place where he was a navigation officer. Can you tell us anything about that?
He was assistant navigation officer, and he also manned a anti-aircraft gun off of the I forget, back of the ship.
The aft part of the ship, stern, off the
Okay.
stern.
So that was his battle station? maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
But his job was assistant navigation officer?
Yeah.
Okay, so the stories are partially correct anyway.
I got one other question. Since we're actually going to be out of tape in a little before we know it, after the war ends, you get out of the Navy, and years later, how did your experiences aboard the Monterey impact your life? And I ask this of everybody who's I've interviewed.
When I got out, through all this experience, I was never afraid. But when I got home, I just went to pieces, very depressed. And my mother sent me to a doctor, and this was in Center City, Philadelphia, and this doctor, he would try to help me. And every time I got there, and I would just cry, and he would let me sit there until I got over it. And then, but this went on every time I went there. So then he says, Ed, finally he says, I want you to go across this street to Arthur Murray Studios and learn to dance. So I did that. And I kind of liked it. And as after a while, they were doing advertising Arthur Murray on television, and so I ended up on television dancing with my instructor.
So you're on TV then?
Yeah.
That's interesting. And did that
But-
help you try to pull away from your experiences aboard
Yeah,
the ship?
it helped. And so my father had a place on Long Beach Island, and weekends I would go down there, and there were up near the lighthouse was a place, a Norwegian club, and I went there, and they did dancing. I went there because of the dancing, and it was a Norwegian dance called the schottische. So I fell in love with that. So I'd have a partner, and we'd dance and jump around and spin around. Then there would be we'd form a circle, and we'd circle all around. And so I go there every weekend when I go down there. I was told I would never talk about it. So eventually the doctor says, well, you got to get it out of your system. Get it out. Tell somebody. Get it out. Eventually I started that, and it did help. Just like I'm talking now. But every once in a while it pops up. You never get over it.
Did you lose any close friends on board the Monterey?
There was just guys that I worked with that we were friendly. Oh, I went to get back to this Sunday school bit. On Sundays, we'd be up on the flight deck. We were always up there, whether it was, no matter what it was, flight decks, operations, or what. And so Sunday they'd have a church service down near the captain's quarters. So there's about 5 of us who would go down there, and then we'd come back up again. They started calling us the Sunday school boys. And that's how I got the name Sunday School Boy.
Did the Navy, when you got out of the service, did they, Navy or U.S. government ever give any help like they do today with returning veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq, or is that not available at the time?
There was some meetings where, like at the Lincoln Hall Hospital, they had a section there for Navy, for any veteran returning. I went there a few times, but there wasn't anything directly by the Navy to help us.
It was just like a discussion group they held, it sounds like, at this hospital then.
Yeah.
Just sit down and talk about your experiences and sort of get them out.
Yeah.
So you don't just keep them forced in or so like that.
Yeah, that's about it.
Can I ask a question? I see on your hat, USS Monterey CVL 26. There's 2 medals up there. What do those medals mean? There's a red one at the top, and then there's a yellow gold one below with stars. What are
the
they?
gold one was the battle stars in the South Pacific. There's 5 there. The top one was awarded for the whole overall Philippines.
Philippines operation.
Yeah, the whole situation. But the others are for individual battles like Lady Gulf and places like that.
Can you tell us anything about the battles in the Leyte Gulf? Do you remember anything about that? Particularly about Halsey's actions there, which were somewhat controversial.
Well, the fleet entered Lady Gulf because they were landing, and the fleet got there, and there was no opposition, and they thought, oh, this is a trap. So they backed out, and they went up to the northern part of the Philippines, and they come across the Jap Navy, and so we did battle with the Jap Navy, and we really beat them up. They were heading back to this Japanese islands.
There were reports that Halsey took a good part of the fleet north and left the Marines in Leyte Gulf unsupported except by a small task force. Were you part of the one that went, the group that went north? Was it Monterey part of the one that group that went north?
Yeah, we went. It's funny, we went northern part of Lady Gulf. I was still there, and the landing was uncovered. I don't know what happened after that. And I remember we started gradually raiding up and down the Philippines, and we started raiding on Okinawa and Japan. We got up to Japan, and were ordered all the way up to the northern part of the Japanese islands, which was just below the Arctic Circle. And one morning, ordered up to the flight deck, and there was 4 inches of snow. So I had to help shovel that off.
It's a change of pace from Lady Gulf to the Arctic almost, isn't it? From heat, humidity to cold and snow.
Yeah.
You were at Okinawa. Did you experience any kamikazes?
Oh, yeah.
Could you tell us about that? What do you recall?
None. They dove on us, but they were shot down before they did any reached us. the carrier Enterprise was there, and they had been through all 23 battles in the Pacific, and it was a beautiful sunshine day, and the blue water and the blue sky, not a cloud just one big cloud in the sky. And after the kamikaze attack, we shot them all down, and we thought, well, this battle's over. We all sort of relaxed, and I remember a guy saying, "Look at that plane coming down on the Enterprise." He was hiding up in this cloud, and when everybody was relaxed, he just dove on the kamikaze, dove onto the Enterprise. He went through the flight deck and underneath the forward elevator, and the bomb exploded once he was under there, and it blew the forward elevator up into the, you could see this whole elevator up in the air, and eventually dropped down. But then that was the last battle of the Pacific, and the Enterprise had been through all 23 battles, and that's when they got hit.
Ed, we have about 4 minutes left on this tape, and I normally ask a question. Is there anything we should have asked about that we haven't, that you think is important to tell us and tell historians when they watch this tape someday?
I think we pretty well covered everything. I can't think of anything else.
We picked your brain to the core. Ron, do you have any other question?
No, I think we covered most of the questions I had.
What would you, since I was a history teacher in college, if I would go back to my class and teach about World War II in the Pacific, what should I tell my students about the Pacific War?
It was outside of Pearl Harbor. The typhoon had struck the Third Fleet. After Pearl Harbor, they had the most loss of life and damage. And this next of the whole Pacific War, the typhoon damaged the Third Fleet, and loss of ships and men was the next biggest loss of ships and men.
Sure.
The typhoon.
Yeah, I've read that where the experts say it was the biggest defeat the Navy suffered in World War II without the Japanese attacking us. It was Mother Nature, sinking 3 destroyers, over 900 men are lost, drowned in the water, damaged to many ships, including the Monterey. But there's interesting thing, there's a lot of heroism and bravery coming out of that story too, on the positive side. It's an amazing story. Well, Ed, I want to thank you for talking with us today. My name is Dr. Tom Bennett from Kane University in Battleship, New Jersey. I've been working with Mr. Ron Gottardi, who is a docent aboard the Battleship, New Jersey, and who absolutely lined up this interview. We've been talking with Mr. Edward Holweger, who served aboard the USS Monterey during World War II. And Ed, I want to also, thank you for the interview, and I also want to thank you for your service to the country during a very dangerous time, and you were in some really super dangerous situations, and you really served us well, so thank you very much. Thank you.